Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Paul Jay, coming to you from Washington. We're in our studios in the McClatchy newsroom. Now joining us is Shashank Bengali. He just returned from Africa, recently from McClatchy, and now is a national reporter for the McClatchy, D.C. office. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
So let's talk about what's happening in Guantanamo. The government task force recommended that 35 of the Guantanamo prisoners be held indefinitely without trial. At the same time, 27 of the Yemenis, if I understand it correctly, have been found not guilty of anything, but are still being held there. And there's others that have been found not guilty, the Uyghurs and others that are sitting there. So what's the situation now?
Well, there's a real backlog in Guantanamo now. There's 198 prisoners who they've got to do something with if they want to close the prison. And the task force, this interagency task force that Obama appointed, has been going through case by case and looking at each individual detainee and seeing, are they guilty of anything? Can we try them? Should they be released? And as you mentioned, there's 27 Yemenis who need to be released and aren't being released. And now there's 35 who the government says need to be held indefinitely because they can't be tried. They don't have enough evidence against them, but they believe these guys could be dangerous.
So the 35 that we're talking about, that's a big deal because that essentially violates any kind of normal principle of American law, that you don't have enough evidence or the evidence is tainted, but we're going to hold them anyway. So this recommendation goes to where? To Attorney General Holder? Who's going to now make the decision here?
Well, the White House has to decide what they're going to do. It's illegal under U.S. law now to hold anyone without trying them. You can't indefinitely imprison anybody. So there has to probably be a congressional petition to change that law. Now, the White House has not indicated if they're going to do that, but clearly if they intend to hold these guys, they have to change the law, and I'm sure it's going to be challenged by lawyers because it's a fundamental violation of basic U.S. law.
So people you're talking to, what do they think is the alternative to holding them? First of all, they're holding them because they say they have some kind of evidence, but it wouldn't stand up in a court.
Right.
So what's the alternative to this?
Well, the experts, the lawyers, the activists say you either need to try these guys or release them. Those are the only two options. That holding them indefinitely is not an option. It's illegal. The problem is that a lot of these guys that the U.S. believes are dangerous, they don't have evidence against them. It was either obtained through torture, evidence has been destroyed or tainted, and they're fearful of releasing these guys. For example, the Yemenis. They're fearful of releasing them back into Yemen because they don't believe that Yemen can keep an eye on them. And so there's a huge, it's just a huge backlog, and it's really not clear what the White House is going to do about this.
Now, we've interviewed recently Michael Ratner, the president for Center for Constitutional Rights, and his point is pretty straightforward. You either have a system of laws, and the laws have due process, and if you have to let people out you might think are guilty, well, you do that all the time. And there's been cases in the U.S. where serial killers go loose because for technicalities. You just decide the principle is more important. Why is this any different?
Well, it shouldn't be any different, Paul. You're right. I mean, as you say, we release criminals all the time and keep an eye on them. The problem is politics has come into play here. Because there were 27 guys from Yemen, including an additional 3 Yemenis who have been ordered to be released by federal judges. Their cases have been heard, and the judges said these guys need to be released. There's nothing, they've done nothing wrong. The problem is politics has come into this, and now with the failed underwear bombing on Christmas Day and the reports that this guy allegedly plotted in Yemen, there's been a lot of political pressure on the White House to stop, suspend transferring detainees to Yemen, when in reality this should not have changed the White House policy to close Guantanamo. So because politics is involved now, suddenly Yemen is a no-go, and they've got to stop. And really, lawyers say that this should never have been a political calculation.
Now, what real evidence is there that Yemenis that were released previously under the Bush administration have actually gone back into some form of terrorist activity? Because apparently there's quite a bit of debate about the reality of that.
Well, there's only one Yemeni that we know of, reportedly, who was imprisoned at Guantanamo and then released into Yemen and allegedly joined al-Qaeda. There's one report about that, and the Yemeni government says they believe that they killed him in an airstrike some weeks back. It's not confirmed. It's impossible to confirm these things. But of the, several, it was at least 100 Yemenis who were held at Guantanamo at any given time. Only one who's been released that they know of has actually gone back.
How many have been released?
It's unclear. The most recent release involved 6 Yemenis in December. There's probably been less than a dozen overall who've been released.
But there's only been one confirmed case of someone who's been back into that kind of activity.
Right, and we can't even say for sure if they've been back. As we know, some of these guys who went and joined militant groups after being released were never militants before, but they became radicalized inside Guantanamo. So we can't say that they've rejoined, but they're connected to. There's one guy who was connected to militant groups. Yeah.
Now, where do things stand in terms of the trials? There was some talk about some of these trials moving to Illinois and some of the prisoners moving to Illinois. Where's that at?
Well, the Obama administration has to still ask Congress to allow the Illinois prison to be opened as a federal prison, and it's not. There's certain people would be held there, certain prisoners, only if they were going to go to trial. The law right now says that you are not allowed to hold people if you're not going to try them. Now, this is the problem with these 35 guys you mentioned. What's going to happen to them, nobody quite knows. And the White House has not said if they plan on moving those guys to Illinois or not. My sense is that they would have to put them somewhere, and Illinois seems to be the default place that they would put them.
Thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.